breathe. Breathe. Just breathe already, goddammit. The only sound was the pathetic gurgling escaping the child's lips, a horrifying parody of a death rattle against the cold, unforgiving tile. My fingers pressed down, desperate and frantic, on the child's tiny chest. Each push felt hollow, a cruel mockery of life. That's what I've kept telling myself, I muttered, the words lost in the echoing emptiness of the yard. Perez emerged from the darkness like a shark smelling blood. His face, usually creased with a sardonic smile, was a mask of cold fury under the harsh, flickering light. The air itself seemed to crackle with his unspoken rage. "Mark, ease up. You'll crack her ribs at that rate." His voice was a fierce, low growl, each word a punch to the gut. Before I could stammer a reply, he shoved me aside with a force that sent me sprawling. The tile floor felt slick with a sheen of cold sweat. Or maybe. No, don't think about that. Perez took over, his hands moving with a practiced efficiency that I wanted to own. Each rhythmic compression of the child's chest was a hammer blow to my hope, each forced breath a cruel echo of the one that would never come. My mouth was dry. A part of me wanted to scream, to acknowledge the futility, but the rest, the darker, more selfish part, craved the silence, the finality it promised. The silence that wouldn't hold me accountable for the sickening feeling of bones giving way under my touch, for the terror that threatened to drown me whole. "Hey, over here! Deep end! Here's another one!" April 12th, 1987. Those were still the beginning days, back when the thought of a misplaced bandage felt like a potential career ender. Not because I only cared about the patient, but because the weight of their death, their family's blame, would be a lead weight chaining me down forever. Yeah, I'd heard the stories. Docs messing up, nurses fumbling, and lives flickering out because of a misplaced decimal point in a medication dosage. The thought of carrying that kind of burden, that lingering stench of negligence, wasn't about some Hippocratic oath. It was about self-preservation. This job, it was about keeping my own head above the rising tide of misery, making sure the mistakes weren't mine. Pressure? Perez, my senior, would often raise his eyebrows as he'd tell me, "It's the difference between holding on and letting go. You learn to live with it, or this job swallows you whole." It was about time now. Unit 12, situation at Bluebell Lane. Possible drowning, 5-year-old girl, 4-year-old boy reportedly missing. Immediate response needed. The silence that followed the dispatcher's clipped words stretched thick with unspoken dread. Toddlers. The last sliver of sun bled from the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple as we, Perez and I, screeched to a halt on Bluebell Lane. The house itself was unremarkable, a suburban silhouette against the dying light. Street lamps flickered to life, casting long, skeletal shadows across the otherwise nondescript scene. But the normalcy ended there. A churning mass of people pulsed in the driveway, confused and still, in contrast to the stillness of the evening. Yellow caution tape, just being breached in several places, struggled to contain the morbid curiosity of onlookers. It was the firefighters, trained EMTs at that, who seemed to have arrived just a moment before us. The firefighters, their faces grim under the harsh yellow lights, waved us towards the center of the maelstrom. Perez, a whirlwind of efficiency, already moved towards the kneeling figure, barking orders. I hung back for a moment, the weight of 100 eyes suddenly on me. Everyone seemed to be waiting. "Get the trauma bag," Perez called back, his voice tight. "And the kid-sized stuff." Kid-sized stuff. The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands trembled as I unlatched the back of the ambulance. Trauma meant the usual suspects: bandages, fluids, IV kits. Kid-sized meant smaller masks, thinner needles, brightly colored cartoon stickers for after, the kind of things you never wanted to use. My gaze darted toward the firefighters and Perez, a silent plea for guidance, for I felt confused. But they were a closed circle, focused on the single point of the kneeling figure and the still form beneath them. But nothing. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I grabbed the pediatric attachment kit, the plastic bag crinkling in my hand. It shouldn't feel so heavy, a collection of colorful plastic and rubber designed for smaller bodies. Adrenaline surged through me, pushing me past the throng of panicked onlookers. I forced my gaze away from the algae-slick pool, the image already burned onto my retinas. A young girl lay sprawled out on the cold concrete next to it, motionless. A woman was hunched over her CPR attempts a frantic, desperate rhythm against the backdrop of terrified screams. "Please, you have to help her," the woman rasped, her voice cracking with raw terror. "I don't know how long she's been there." Her words trailed off, choked by a sob. I knelt beside her, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The pediatric resuscitation mask, adorned with cartoon characters and a horrifyingly misplaced cheerfulness, felt heavy and cold in my clammy hand. This wasn't a drill. It was a critical battle to save a young and precious life. "Has the other kid been found yet?" Perez muttered, his voice strained. His eyes, usually sharp with a sardonic glint, now held a raw, primal fear I'd never seen before. A cold dread gripped my gut, tightening with each desperate compression Perez administered. Where was the other child? "What other kid?" a firefighter murmured incredulously, wiping sweat from his brow. "Our call only mentioned drowning. There was no mention of 2 kids. That's why no one had found the other child yet." Perez, usually a wisecracking cynic, surprised me. "Mark, you on CPR." He barked, his voice tight. He gestured towards the open ambulance door, his own focus glued to the young girl on the ground as he stood up, leaving me in charge of the girl. Suddenly, I wasn't the observer. I was in the thick of it. The pressure, the fear, everything was on me now. And so it started. Me, performing CPR with the hopes I didn't make a mistake. The pulse was there, just had to get the girl back. The frantic chatter of onlookers reached me in snippets. James, the missing boy's name, a familiar face for them, apparently. Apparently, he liked to visit the neighbor's yard, a hide-and-seek champion in his own mind. But this time the game had dragged on far too long. An accident a few weeks back left him with a limp, another piece to the puzzle of his disappearance. And for some reason, that fact was distracting me more than what I was meant to be doing. My heart hammered in my chest, drowning out the panic chatter around me. This wasn't the children's home pool. The sickening realization slammed into me. We were at the wrong damn place. It was the neighbor's place where the little girl had drowned, meaning James was definitely supposed to be around here if he were hiding. "What?" Perez barked, his voice tight as he scanned the faces around us, searching for answers. A choked sob pierced the air, escaping from the woman who had been desperately administering CPR. Her tear-streaked face now burned with a mixture of sorrow and fury. "That sorry, drunken excuse for a father," she seethed, her voice rough with emotion. "We banged on his door, shouting that his own kids were out wandering the neighborhood at this hour again, but he..." She gestured toward the house, her hand trembling. "The TV blared at full volume and he wouldn't even answer the damn door." The air crackled with a sickening tension. The weight of the situation, the wrong location, the unresponsive father, it all threatened to push me over the edge. There was no time for blame, only a desperate hope that we weren't already too late. "Breathe. Breathe. Just breathe already, goddammit." The only sound was the pathetic gurgling escaping the girl's lips. My fingers pressed down, desperate and frantic on the child's tiny chest. Each push felt hollow, a cruel mockery of life. Making sure those mistakes aren't mine. That's what I've kept telling myself. I muttered, the words lost in the echoing emptiness of the yard. I was compressing too hard on a child, desperate for her to breathe. That's when I was shoved off by Perez, and he warned me that I'd break the child's ribs as he started performing CPR on the child now. And the next thing I know was that I simply wanted to disappear. I pressed too high on a child, and even Perez pointed it out, an anger in his tone that I messed up. The firefighters, grim-faced, were already wading into the deep end of the pool. The green, stagnant water churned as they prodded with long poles, disturbing a thick layer of algae. Then, a shout from the pool. "Hey, over here, deep end. There's the other one." A firefighter emerged, his strong arms cradling a limp form. It was a young boy. The scene fell into a chilling silence, devoid of CPR or frantic attempts to revive by the firefighters. The boy was gone, lifeless, gone. Shit, Mark, I'm losing the girl. We need to move her. Get the gurney. We need to. A flat beep. That's what I heard within me. In just a matter of seconds, both the kids were dead. The gurneys rolled past, the lifeless forms under white sheets, a chilling confirmation of our failure. The frantic struggle to save them, the blaring sirens. It all blurred into a haze of exhaustion and despair. But the true despair came later, a kind of emptiness that settled in my gut. It wasn't just the failed resuscitation, the agonizing knowledge that we hadn't been enough. It was him, the father, the man whose children had spent their last moments just feet from their own home, unattended. Police slipped into his home through the open back door, the same route the children likely took to leave. Inside, he sprawled in an armchair amidst empty liquor bottles, the TV blaring at maximum volume, its flickering light casting shadows on his sleeping form. He was so deeply intoxicated that the commotion outside, a fleet of emergency vehicles with flashing lights and blaring sirens, failed to rouse him. When officers delivered the tragic news, he briefly stirred. His eyes flickered open, registering their solemn words before he shrugged indifferently and resumed his oblivious, snoring sleep. The sting of our failure paled in comparison to the horror of his indifference. It was a wound that would take far longer to heal, a testament to the true tragedy that unfolded that day. The memory still claws at me. a jagged scar on my soul. Back then, mistakes were a career ender, a heavy weight that could drown you. Maybe that's what held me back. It wasn't some medical marvel, just a girl who needed CPR and another child who vanished beneath the surface. We found one lifeless beside the murky pool, a victim of the stagnant water. Why didn't we consider the other might share the same fate? Were the panicked whispers of onlookers more reliable than logic? I can't blame them. The green, stagnant water swallowed him whole, a silent accomplice. But the girl, there was a faint pulse when I took over. Panic choked me, and my hands, used to following orders, betrayed me. I wasn't ready. Perez, a pillar of stoicism, was forced to intervene. The way he looked at me afterwards, a flicker of something akin to pity in his steely gaze, sent a fresh wave of nausea churning in my gut. Self-doubt gnawed at me, a relentless chorus of what-ifs echoing in my skull. 2 lives hung precariously in the balance, and I was fumbling in the dark, every action a desperate gamble against the rising tide of despair. Once sober and brought in for questioning, the father's true nature emerged with chilling clarity. There were no tears, no cries of anguish, just cold, calculated blame. "It's you medics who failed at your job," he accused sharply. As for the deceased mother, he bitterly stated, "She abandoned her family." After all, it wasn't the failure that haunted me, the sting of not being enough. It was the weight of the children's unspoken story, the invisible burden they must have carried. What neglect had they endured? What unspoken pain had festered within them, unseen and unheard? The image of them, those 2 fragile souls, surfaced in my mind's eye. No longer lifeless forms on a gurney, but children, adrift in a sea of their father's apathy. Helpless, unseen, floating